All right, we turn to this now. There's been mixed reaction to the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan's decision to appeal a recent ruling exempting public institutions like hospital, clinics, schools and police stations from load shedding. This after the courts found that the rolling power cuts are infringing on various constitutional rights. For more on this, we're now joined by Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane, National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa Executive Director Basil, as well as the South African Medical Association Chairperson Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa. Gentlemen, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight here on In Focus. It seems, Mmusi, it was a short-lived victory for yourselves and the dozen of other parties that brought this matter to court, because here is now the Department of Public Enterprises saying they're going to challenge this particular judgment. Tell me why this judgment should not be set aside.
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. Firstly, I think our case was always premised on the idea of constitutional obligations. Let's take a hospital as an argument's sake. The right to life and the right to health care constitute imperatives that we cannot depart from. So when someone goes to a hospital and an incubator fails during load shedding, that infringes on their right. So, and it would be the same argument I would make towards teaching. It would be the same argument I would make towards the right to safety, which is provided for by police. Now, in this fundamental issue, this is not a tiny victory. It's a step in the right direction in what has been a 15-year battle with load shedding. And for Pravin Gordhan and this government to feel it must appeal to exactly how much they've now fast becoming the enemy of the people, they literally are acting in a manner they're opposing constitutionality. And ultimately, I feel it lacks moral courage to say, look, a court now has directed us that within 60 days, we must fulfill our constitutional obligation of giving alternative energy to all of these sectors. So to me, we will continue to fight, and in the 60 days that are coming up next, we'll monitor the issue. And if they want to meet us in court, we will oppose them there. But we are asking citizens to realize who exactly they are up against, and we will take them also on the streets.
Yeah. Dr. Mzukwa, certain hospitals, and a number of them, are already being exempt from load shedding because of, I suppose, the efforts that you have been putting as the health sector. But there are some energy experts who are saying, in fact, that the ruling, as it sits right now, is going to put a country, even the health system, in much more danger if we were to have a complete blackout. The risk to the health sector would be even more severe. Are you asking the nation to take a risk that we cannot afford?
Good evening to you, Thabo, and my fellow panelists in this call. Thabo, this is a very serious matter. Like Mr. Maimane said earlier on, it is a battle that has been going on for 15 years. I think government had enough time, to plan around how to exempt, as these critical institutions. I am going to confine myself to the healthcare sector. When we talk about the impact of the load shedding now, it's not only the impact that affects patients only, but also it is an impact that affects healthcare workers. Because you can imagine what happens to them psychologically when they lose a patient or when they have to resuscitate a patient because of load shedding. At some point, some of the operations had to be finished using cell phone lights and all these things, and resuscitating without the help of those equipments that would be useful when there is electricity. So I don't understand why we should be debating the issue of exempting hospitals when actually there's evidence that if we don't exempt them, we are going to have a huge problem. In fact, that is why our own colleagues are leaving the country, because this is adding on the inconvenience that the public sector has, on the well-being of healthcare professionals. Coming to the patients themselves, I'm yet to hear from government how many patients have we lost because of load shedding. I think that audit has to come through, and then we can have a debate going forward.
So let me come to you, Basil. There seems to be an interference with your sound there, Basil, but what we're going to ask you to do is, when we are talking, you can unmute, but you can also mute them if we are not engaging with you. But I'm coming to you now, so you can leave it open. What is the degree of electricity that is required by schools during the day, especially, to the point that it would justify them being exempt?
First, let me greet everybody. And secondly, let me say, we seem to have forgotten the schooling sector. We've heard a lot about the economy, which is right. We've heard a lot about the hospitals, which is the right thing, because we're talking about life there. However, we forget that there are thousands and thousands of children in special schools that are in practical subjects where they need power. We think about the high-end subjects where they need power for computers and things. But it goes even further. We've been trying to get into the fourth industrial revolution. How do we get there when we don't have the means to even try to get in? Take, for example, administration. We've tried to get administration online for the last 10 years. Suddenly schools can't even do that. So it is a real problem. But it goes further to the more smaller things, the overcrowded classes, where if you don't have proper lighting, you don't even know what's happening, particularly in the winter months. Our schools aren't the best built, so there are many, many things in education that are not happening optimally. And then we all cry about the quality of education and the outcomes in education, when in fact we are not doing the barest minimum. And it's not about fixing Eskom within the next 60 days. It's about finding alternatives that we have tabled 15 years ago about solar energy that does not need storage, so that you can at least use it during the day by conversion. That is what schools need as a short-term measure.
So, Mmusi, if we look at the statement from the Department of Public Enterprises, I don't know what they'll put in their papers, but from their statement, they are arguing at this particular point that the rights that the parties that are raising in their court papers are valid rights, but the legal advice that they are getting, though, is that the risk to the grid and the complete collapse of the grid would have far much more devastating consequences if we do not use this last resort that we have to protect the grid. In other words, to keep the available energy and the demand a little bit lower, so that we can have reserves. If we do not load shed, the collapse of the grid is inevitable. In other words, we are going to see power station after power station trip, and that would roll out into a complete darkness. Now, big challenge is that this is going to take minimum 15 days to re-energize and get that going. In that space of 15 days means hospitals will have completely no electricity. Schools will have no electricity. The financial sector will have no electricity. Food production, no electricity. Morgues, you name it. It's a complete disaster if we do not mitigate that risk.
Firstly, this is the argument they try to advance in court. In fact, that's where the president's argument really stems from. It was defeated not only by the courts themselves, but it actually meant that the argument itself is poor from a number of perspectives. The first and most obvious one is that load shedding isn't the only panacea or route we can go. I have already in our 10-point plan made a proposal to say that actually, if the deficit is about 6,000 megawatts, what South Africa ought to be doing, even as we speak right now, is exploring all options of what typically is called build to own or build to operate solutions that can come on board. Those can introduce technologies like gas, nuclear, and multiple technologies that augment or energy to the capacity of the 6,000 megawatts that we need. We should be aggressively looking at that issue. And the reality of it is that we sold ourselves into the load shedding dream only to fail to fix our coal-powered power stations. That's actually the fundamental issue. Secondly, why has there been an extended delay in providing security at Eskom power plants? Lastly, this leadership dilemma that they put us in will create more problems than, in fact, what the demand cycle of the issue is actually inventing when you've got the Minister of Electricity, Energy, Public Enterprises, and multiple sectors. So to me, this big threat that simply says, well, we are too incompetent that if we were to try and not do what we are now currently doing, we'd end up with a grid loss, is a threat to the people of this country, and it cannot be acceptable. You can't just say, well, we'll just punish you slowly, rather than, and for fear that we could just destroy the whole infrastructure. It's nonsense. There are alternatives on the table, and furthermore, I would caution this government from allowing us to enter into a grid loss of that nature, simply because they say it's not defensive. The last point I'll make is this. The solution to load shedding equals requires the reduction of demand. When you use all the roof spacing available to school, by augmenting it and putting in, for example, solar and different types of technology, you naturally reduce demand, and that will ultimately make sure it stabilizes various sectors. You do the same in hospitals, you do the same in police stations, as already the mining sectors are already starting to do that, and private households are already starting to do that. You are able to create the sort of stability in demand. So to me, I don't buy the argument that was lost in courts, and it is frankly a government that has failed for 15 years, now threatening us with worse failure.
Right, back with you, still with us tonight, Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane, National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa Executive Director Basil Manuel, as well as the South African Medical Association's Chairperson, Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa. Before the break, Mmusi Maimane is saying, well, they can't threaten us with their incompetence. They failed for 15 years. Now they are telling us that the whole grid is going to collapse if they don't continue this one-trick pony that they have of load shedding. And by the way, load shedding is supposed to be the last resort, which means that there are many other alternatives that they should have tried before we got here. I don't know whether they have tried them and how successful they have been. But Basil, one energy expert, in fact, even Eskom, if I'm not mistaken, would have raised this issue that just by the sheer number of schools that we have in the country, and to Mmusi's point, if we were to decide we are going to be putting solar panels on all those schools, it would mean that we set aside the maintenance program, for example, of Eskom, because of just budgetary constraints, and focus on that particular initiative. Is that the risk we're willing to take?
I think a point has been made by Mr. Maimane where he says it's about alternatives. And, you know, the tragedy is that 15 years ago, we spoke about this as an alternative then, when this was in the early stages. And we've made no movement. We haven't even begun to try to address alternatives to the energy issue. And that is where the problem lies. So the risk factor is even greater if we do nothing about an alternative. Just think about it. If we continue on this line, do you think it's going to get any better? What has it shown that we have this infrastructure budget that has done nothing to improve Eskom? Should we not then lessen the burden on Eskom by starting another project? And that is what we are saying.
Yeah. Dr. Mzukwa, is the health sector beginning to think about a total grid collapse? Are we over-exaggerating, over-anticipating, underestimating a possibility of a total grid collapse in our conversations?
Well, Thabo, if you look, for example, in the private sector, they have catered for that and they are ready for anything. But come to the state, there is no preparation for anything. In fact, I don't think we should be scared of that total collapse of the grid, Because if you look at it now, the healthcare system has already collapsed. I'm not sure what collapse are you talking about. Collapsing in what sense? Because it's already collapsed. Look at the backlog when it comes to surgery. We've got in the whole country about 175,000 cases that are waiting to be operated on. And this is because there was COVID-19, but one of the compounding factors was this of load shedding. So I'm not sure what we're talking about, because we're already in a crisis mode when it comes to healthcare in South Africa. So I don't buy the story that we should be scared that there will be a collapse. I mean, we gave options back in last year in October when we demanded that there should be an exemption of hospitals. We asked government, in fact, we demanded that government install generator systems and or solar power supply. And that never happened. They always drag their feet, and somebody has decided now to drag them to the court of law, and now they are crying foul. I don't buy the story that we must be scared of that collapse of the grid.
What alternatives, Mmusi Maimane, do we have? You're saying best practice to preventing a grid collapse, others say, is rolling power cards, implementing rotational power cards, reducing supply to industry. Right now, today, in South Africa, with Eskom with over 500 billion rands in debt and the situation with our fiscus in the country, what options do we have?
No, and I think that's a very crucial issue. If we're able to implement a plan that did the following things: one, begin right now to use all available roof space to augment it with solar, particularly in those critical sectors. That begins the journey. Second, along with that, which is part of what we mentioned, is to introduce a level of gas and other alternatives that are coming onto the market.
They're arguing, sorry, while you're there, let me jump in. They're arguing that gas is the most expensive way of actually producing electricity at this particular point.
Well, it can't be more expensive than the job losses, the lives, the teachers, all of the other demise that is taking place. Most people would argue that, in fact, load shedding is costing us over R1 billion a day. Now, the question on the table is whether you want to sustain that expense over a long period of time. So to me, I don't buy the expense argument. I do expect the fact that the on-selling of energy has got other problems, has got its own cost factor to the consumer. But believe you me, the South African consumer, whether it be business or any other sector, is bleeding more through lack of productivity that occurs at stage 6 of load shedding. Eventually you hit a point where literally for manufacturing sector, we run the risk of being able to lose that sector for a long period of time. And those are the amount of jobs and families that will go hungry. So we've got to really be laser focused on this issue. I'm convinced, and I'll say this on here, that given the laser focus, we should be out of load shedding within the next 18 months if we're able to not only fix some of the engineering problems that are taking place within our coal-powered fleets, but also reduce demand by augmenting it with energy and the various technologies I've already outlined. And then thirdly, ensuring that we introduce, as I've already proposed, some of the SMR or small modular reactors of nuclear that would give us the balance of power so that we keep what is typically called base load, so that we can ensure that we don't have this fluctuating energy supply that goes on. I'm convinced that we'd be able to get through this program.
Yeah. The department arguing to say, well, what you are asking in this exemption, one, will, of course, put us at risk of a complete grid collapse. But also, it's similarly, they're saying you're interfering with our efforts to try and end load shedding. Just let us get on with it. What exactly are they doing, except for what we are hearing, even today at the NCOP, to say the electricity minister still doesn't have powers. So legislative powers is still sitting with, Minister of Energy, and administrative powers still sitting with the Department of Public Enterprises. But we've got this minister who's going up and down, but he can't really do anything. So are we really dealing with load shedding, or are they really dealing with load shedding as they say they are?
At this particular point, honestly, we have to worry as South Africans that there aren't other elements of. We've already heard Andre de Ruyter's testimony where he speaks about the fact that there's high levels of corruption. But the other issue that I worry about is that we're not being sold the renewables deal for other deals that are relatively corrupt at the expense of the people of this country. Whilst the global society appreciates mitigation against environmental effects, South Africans cannot be asked to say to themselves, you move away from coal, but the rest of us will keep burning coal-powered power stations, and you must just live with load shedding. That is an unacceptable rationale. We have to fix our coal-powered stations. We have to ensure that we keep our grid stable, and we have to grow our economy. And to the very respected entities that are on even this particular call, whether the healthcare sector or the teaching sector, let us then join efforts together, sign the petition, stop the government from being able to go, we're going to litigate against people, and let's rather focus on solutions that will stop load shedding and ensure that we keep stability. But at this point in time, we simply allow this government to keep us down the merry-go-round. I do not trust the fact that the efforts even around load shedding are pure and are free of corruption. I really maintain that there are other agendas at play here, and what we should rather be focused on is really saying, what is a tangible plan? You've got a Minister of Electricity who started the job, and if they today can't deliver a plan, it tells you that the macro state of the government doesn't have a cogent plan, which is even deeply worrying.
Basil, the other question, of course, also raised by Alta earlier on, saying, I mean, they don't believe that the minister should be challenging this, but they also believe the implementation of this exemption could certainly cost taxpayers quite a lot. It could prove to be expensive in a sense to be able to isolate hospitals, police stations, and so on and so forth, because currently schools, for example, are connected to the same grid that the rest of the community is connected to. So there is no way in which you can certainly do that. I'm asking that question in a sense that we are, of course, in a space of high inflation at this particular point. So our salaries do not go as far as they should be going. Particularly public servants have been demanding increases. Now, we are putting more responsibility in terms of the financial situation in the country by saying, let's spend our money this way. Is it sustainable?
Can we afford not to do anything? That is the question we've got to ask. Can we afford not to look at alternatives? If we sit and fold our arms and do nothing about it, how is it going to improve? I'm saying nothing is going to be painless, irrespective of what it is that we decide. And it is not about saying, fix Eskom within the next 6 months. We know that's not possible. But to find an alternative to Eskom is going to cost money. And the money has to come from somewhere. Already, private citizens are spending hundreds of thousands with panels on their roofs, etc. And of course, that is going to continue. But government will have to come to the party to ensure that those sectors that government controls need to be working so that tomorrow we are still competing with the outside world. As we stand at the moment, our children are slipping backwards and we are no longer being competitive with the world out there. And that is the problem of education.
Yeah. Dr. Mzukwa, at some point at the department, at National, we're talking of exploring the alternative of exempting, in fact, not just exempting, but investing in the ability to be able to isolate hospitals from the broader grid within the communities that they are operating in. Was it just lip service, or is there actual work that is beginning to be done?
Well, you recall that when we had the same conversation last year, if I'm not mistaken, there was a media briefing by the minister and had promised, all the plans, and also was talking about the engaging the treasury and everybody else. But at that time, there was no plan, and even today, there is no plan. It's always addressing the media with nothing, actually. We have not seen anything. Like I said in some quarters, that we continue to have these summits there was a summit even recent. It never spoke about, the problem of load shedding because it's not seen as something very important that has an impact in terms of the health outcomes in the country, but also a contributing factor, to the mortality that we have in the country. So don't expect to get any plans because there are no plans.
Mmusi Maimane, the other issue that they are raising, of course, is the fear that this would have a catastrophic impact, widespread looting and unrest like we saw in the July unrest, should indeed we experience a complete blackout in the country. Is that another, for lack of a better word, swart gevaar? Are they just scaring us for nothing?
Yeah, I mean, this is a government that's run out of ideas. And so, if I remember reading Andre de Ruyter's, who was then the CEO when the court case began, he painted Venezuela and made the case. But in all fairness, many citizens are living in a pseudo-Venezuela as we sit here today. Citizens, in many instances, are going to police stations and their cases are not being solved. The truth is, there are patients going to Baragwanath who, as of yesterday, were not able to eat, or maybe until NGOs eventually deliver food. The Padco bus strike, I can go on and on about the fact that 2 out of 3 young people are not able to find work. So to scare us with the suggestion that there's going to be a hunger, people are already living in that space. Now, to say that a grid loss will suddenly accelerate that or maybe do that, I can appreciate that. When it comes to other sectors, there are significant risks. Banking sectors have got data integrity that they've got to look after, and there are many other sectors. I'm not being irresponsible. I'm merely just trying to demonstrate the fact that the longer we keep the practice of load shedding, which is 15 years old, is a bit like saying, let us create a slow punch, a slow death to the economy with the promise that one day this will get sorted out. And 15 years have shown us that regardless of whatever pronouncements they've made, President Mbeki promised us he'll end load shedding. Zuma did the same. Ramaphosa did the same. How long should citizens keep waiting for some sort of panacea? Now you can add the new ministers, anything you like. South Africans are living in a very difficult space. And today, we cannot simply say that the grid loss will suddenly just make it worse. I want to highlight, just to take a human case study here. A child recently died because the incubator failed during load shedding. How many more children must die? Is that in some ways you are introducing a fear that is already materializing in the lives of too many citizens? So when we build one South Africa, we must come back to a point where we say, frankly, load shedding is impactful to too many people, particularly poor citizens. It's time now that we put a plan that will get us out of here, and we must give whatever the government is. That's why next year's elections are vital. 2-year lease line to say you need to do nothing else but fix load shedding. And I'm convinced it's possible. Show nations like Poland who gave incentives to people to put solar panels and got through the load shedding dilemma. I can take nation after nation that has demonstrated that when confronted with power, I'm almost certain Ukraine, a country in war, has got energy for all of its citizens. Clearly, the issue is not technology. The issue is an incompetent government, and the sooner we remove it, the better it will be for all of us.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Let's leave it there for tonight. Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa, Mmusi Maimane, as well as Basil Manuel. Let's get your thoughts tonight as well. 072-110-5584. Otherwise, tweet us at Newzroom 405. Your In Focus continues tonight. Thanks for staying on. Let's take a look at some of your reaction now coming through on 072-110-5584 to our conversation earlier on. This is from Anonymous saying, hi Thabo, government should not waste money and appeal the ruling. They must just present a plan to implement the court order. Another one saying, hello Thabo, I totally agree with Mmusi. The ANC has failed South Africa. Now they want to threaten us with a total collapse. Good evening, Thabo. I'm appalled at the action our government has decided to take. What is there to defend or appeal that people have the right to life and medical procedure ought to be conducted without interruptions, that children have a right to education, and that our fellow South Africans have a right to safety that is to be provided by the police, who must therefore be reachable at all times, especially in such a crime-ridden country. What kind of people are these? Some of the thoughts there coming through tonight. Much appreciated, and thank you very much. Keep that conversation going. You can also tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405.